So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Monet Schultz, and I serve as the Deputy Chief of Staff and Legislative Director for Assemblymember Khaleel M. Anderson. I'm honored to be here this evening with all of you on behalf of our office. This is one of the most significant programming that we've put together, so we are really excited for this conversation. So I will now turn over the talking points to the Assembly member himself so he can introduce our lovely panel.
Thank you so much, Deputy Chief Schultz. Thank you so much for being on tonight, to all of our panelists, to all of our viewers, both on Facebook and on YouTube, as well as our viewers on Zoom. Thank you guys so much for joining us for one of the last legs of our Black Liberation programming that we've been doing as an office. My name is Kahlil Anderson. I'm proud to serve as your New York State Assembly member in the 31st Assembly District here in Black Southeast Queens. And I'm gracious for the opportunity to talk and have a discussion tonight about reparations and how we use the New York State budget to ensure that our people can get free and that we can repair the harm that's been done to our people for centuries, for decades plus. And so that's what tonight's discussion is about. And if you hadn't had an opportunity to tune into our other Black Liberation programming, you're more than welcome to visit our YouTube page at Assemblymember Khaleel Anderson, as well as our Facebook archives at Assemblymember Khaleel Anderson, to watch our videos, to get immersed in some of the Black Liberation programming that we've been doing this month. We want this month not just to honor our brothers and sisters who helped us get to this moment, to this space of freedom, and those who are carrying us the rest of the way in our future and our past, but we also want to remind people that this is a space of liberation and uplifting and empowerment. And I ran for office to liberate the 31st Assembly District. And I hope that folks can understand that, and that folks can get behind that, and that folks can understand that they have a role in seeking freedom for our people and ourselves. So without further ado, let me introduce our panel for tonight. In tonight's discussion, we have none other than New York City Council member Charles Barron, the Honorable Charles Barron, representing the 42nd New York City Council District. I'm going to read his bio really quickly. New York City Council member Charles Barron has been a community activist for over 50 years. In 1969, in need of a vehicle to express his desire for justice, Barron joined the Harlem branch of the Black Panthers Party. After his Black Panther experience, he attended New York City Community College, now known as New York City Technical College, or City Tech, as folks know it as, where he obtained an associate's degree. He then attended Hunter's College, where he acquired a bachelor's degree of arts in sociology and a minor in elementary education. In 1979, Brother Barron joined the National Black United Front, NBUF, and became the founding chairperson of the Harlem chapter. Shortly after, he was appointed Chief of Staff to Reverend Herbert Daughtry, chairperson of the National Black United Front. He served in various roles throughout the community, including serving as the chair of the Committee on Higher Education for over 8 years when he served in the New York City Council's first tenure. We're super excited to welcome you on the call tonight, the Honorable Charles Barron. You can unmute and say hello. We'll move to the next panelist.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you, my brother. This was the youngest Assembly member to come into the State Assembly, and he was not afraid to stay Black and strong, and he had my back every time. Appreciate you, brother.
Much love, much love. Thank you so much, Brother Barron. All right, so now we have Dr. Ann Bailey. She's a professor of history at the Binghamton University, director of the Harriet Tubman Center for Freedom and Equity, author, and she's also author of The Weeping Times. Sister Bailey is a writer, a historian, and a professor at SUNY Binghamton State University of New York. And in her work, she combines the elements of travel, adventure, history, and the understanding of contemporary issues with an accessible style. Her work ranges from adult nonfiction to children's historical fiction and includes African voices of the Atlantic slave trade beyond the silent and the shame. Ooh, this sister's learned. So without further ado, I'm so excited to welcome her, and I'm going to go more into everyone's bio throughout tonight's community conference, but I want to just touch on some of the highlights. So Sister Bailey, can you unmute? Dr. Bailey, unmute and say hello.
Hello, thank you very much, Assembly Member Anderson. It's I'm really honored to be here, not just to share with you today, but also in such great company. As many of you know, we're all doing different things and all over the place, but we're not often together in the same place. So this is it's really an honor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bailey. And thanks for being on tonight. Move on to our next panelist. We have none other than Dr. Ron Daniels, the president of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, and he's also Professor Emeritus at York College. Dr. Daniels is a veteran social and political activist, was an independent candidate for president of the United States back in 1992. He served as an executive director of the National Rainbow Coalition in 1987 and Southern Regional Coordination and Deputy Campaign Manager for the Reverend Jesse Jackson for the campaign in 1988. He holds a BA in History from Youngstown State University and an MA in Political Science from Rockefeller School of Public Affairs in Albany, New York, and a Doctor of Philosophy and Africana Studies from the Union Institute and University in Cincinnati. Brother Daniels, thank you so much for being on the call tonight. Please unmute and say hello to our audiences who are watching both on Facebook, YouTube, and our audiences who are here on the Zoom call.
Well, it's really an honor to be with you. And since I'm from York College, you know, I normally, had I not been retired, I'm sure I would have interfaced with you because York College spends a great deal on the political leadership in Southeast Queens. So I'm glad to hear you and to meet you. And I like the way you roll so far.
Brother Daniels, you'll know that in this business, you're never retired because our people always need to get free and we need you at the helm. So I know you always will respond to the call. So I appreciate you being on the call tonight.
Thank you.
All right, and our final panelist is Sister Tia Struther. She's the project manager at the Black Freedom Project, statewide organizers. Gonna dip into her bio really quickly. Tia for short. Strother is the project manager for the New York statewide Black Freedom Project and the former program coordinator of the Families United for Racial and Economic Justice, FURY. Her first real introduction to social justice organizing and advocacy began in 2011 with the founding of the 462 Halsey Community Garden in her native neighborhood or hood of Bed-Stuy and joining the efforts to form a Black-led Central Brooklyn Food Cooperative. Ooh, we love to hear it. And since then, Sister Tia has been a leader in the housing, environmental justice, food justice movements, both locally and nationally. Sister Tia, why don't you unmute and say hello to our audiences who are watching live.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, and I'm so excited and honored to be here tonight.
So excited and honored to have you. So my Deputy Chief of Staff, who's serving as our Mistress of Ceremonies, Ms. Monet Schultz, will take us into the agenda as I come onto camera really shortly.
Yes, thank you so much, Assemblymember Anderson. So the first item on our agenda today, as we are discussing reparations in the context of the New York State budget, we are going to start talking about the budget process, right? What is the budget process? What does that look like for our groups and our communities? And mainly, we would like to turn this question over and invite the Honorable Charles Barron to interface with this budget process. What does the New York State budget process look like, Councilmember Barron?
Well, first of all, it's important to understand how much that budget is. You know, the New York State budget, last I looked at it, was over $200 billion. And I think the process is set up for the governor to have a lot of power. But when they say there are 3 people in the budget room, the governor, the head of the Senate, and the head of the Assembly, they, in a delusional way, have people convinced that that's the power. But it isn't. The governor has no vote on the budget. The head of the Senate has 1 vote on the budget. And the head of the Assembly, Speaker, has 1 vote on the budget. There's 150 Assembly members and 63 senators. So how on God's earth do 3 people in the room who can't pass the budget have the power? So that's the first thing they convinced the state and the people of the state to think, that power is in the hands of 3 people. Number one. Number two, when it comes to the state assembly, 150, there's about 40, 50 Black, Latino, and Asian Puerto Rican caucus members. There is no budget because you have to get to 86 is the magic number to pass anything. Without us, nothing can pass. So after the governor presents the budget to us, then we negotiate that budget, make whatever changes that we're going to make. They have committee hearings on the budget, just like they do in the city. And then after all of those hearings, then the speaker will come back to the assembly and say, look, I spoke to the governor, he's not budging. So this is it. We can't do better than this. And mistakenly and spinelessly and cowardly, most of the assembly members kowtow to the speaker because there's other parts of this equation when it comes to budgeting. Do you want to chair a committee? Do you want to get a big office? Do you want your legislation to see the light of day? So while we have the power, there's another thing called influence. So even though the speaker does not have the power, he influences most of the people that have the power to vote the way he wants them to vote. So when people like Kahlil and myself push it a little further and try to get our colleagues to say, no, we're not voting for no budget that doesn't have A, B, C, D in it, we've made some progress. But we haven't gotten to the point where we can say, we could pass reparations in both houses tonight, because we got the numbers, they have the power, but they don't have the will and have the right people in place. So by April 1st, the budget is usually passed. And right now they're going through negotiations and they're looking at every committee before the budget will eventually be passed on April 1st. Unlike the city council, this budget doesn't have to be passed on April 1st. In the city, June 30th, if it's not passed, then the Emergency Control Board of the state takes over the budget process. So right now, it's about making sure if we had stronger people in there, we had a $50 billion revenue package that we would have had a surplus every year. But they were afraid of the governor, afraid of the speaker, and afraid of the majority leader. But that's basically the process.
Thank you very much, Honorable Charles Barron. That's very important for our constituents to know. Oftentimes when the member is talking to folks, right, and they're asking, what are we doing specifically for me? What are we doing for the Black community? What are we doing for X, Y, and Z? And we talk about that budgeting process and getting those budget requests in and talking to your local elected official. Most folks don't know that that is exactly the way in which you get your priorities into the budget, right? And where the power lies within that. So just to sum up the actual process of it, New York does use an executive model. Ideally, the executive is responsible for using and developing that balanced budget. And then as described, the legislature oftentimes opens up with that proposal to the public for public review and have state agencies and stakeholders, to address the proposed budget appropriations. And we'll see that in terms of hearings, roundtables, those sorts of things. Then the governor is required by the state constitution to then seek and coordinate those requests from the agencies and actual legislators. And then that executive budget is sort of, released in mid-January. And then folks go back to the drawing table between the legislators and the executive. And then those final negotiations happen throughout March. And ideally, that budget for the state is due by April 1st. So thank you so much for that description of the budget. And we really want to make sure that our community is understanding what this means for our future, right? But currently for our present, right? So if we want to see certain things, we know where we need to go and where to ask. So Assemblymember Anderson, if you are here and could join us, I don't know if you want to add on to that or if I'll move over.
I would say definitely just stellar job, both of you, just explaining the budget's process, talking about the functions of it, but also, Councilmember Barron talked about the politics of it and what ends up holding up that process for us truly to ensure that a budget impacts our morals and values. I truly believe, and I know Brother Barron and many of the folks who are on this call, both attendees and on this panel, believe that a budget is a moral document. And that document should impact the communities that have been hurt, should impact the neighborhoods who have the most need, and should spell support and resources for those communities being our communities, our Black communities all across this state. It should reflect our willpower to eliminate poverty. It should be reflective of our willpower to help end disease, right? Sickle cell anemia, all the things that we're impacted by as a community. But oftentimes we're shortchanged in that process. So I think you, Councilmember Barron, and to my staff, Ms. Schultz, for talking about the practicalities of it, but also how the politics pervert our ability to get free in that process. So I thank you for that. So we'll move on to the next segment, Ms. Schultz.
Absolutely. So in line with that, and I'm going to reference the Honorable Charles Barron one more time, because as we know, and we are really intrigued by the legislation that you have put forth during your time in the state, and we really do look forward to seeing what is going to come out in the city, on the city level. We just want to know a few things about the reparations bill, if you don't mind. Ready to unmute?
First of all, it's a community, New York State community committee or reparations bills on a community level. We put emphasis on it being a community. First time I put it in, I said that there would be 9 members from the community and 5 from the state. And that was very important because when you finish any reparations bill, it's going to have to come back to the state legislature anyway. So you don't want to give them the power on both ends. At least we should have the power on the front end. So I had Dr. Ron Daniels in the Institute of the Black World. They had 3 seats. We had in Cobra, 3 seats. And then we had the December 12th movement, 3 seats. That was 9. 1 from the governor, 2 from the assembly, the majority and minority, and 2 from the Senate. They had a fit. So it sat there for a couple of years. And finally, they said, can we talk? Can we negotiate? Now I said 9 so I can get them down to, 2 each so we can have 6-5 and still have the edge. So I said, yeah, okay, we can negotiate. They said, how about if we just let the Senate and the governor do it? I said, do I have stupid written on my forehead? No way. So that was out, and we ended up with a bill that has 6 from the community, 2 from Ron and our team, 6 from our team, and 5 from theirs. And then it's simple. It's about remedies, not a study just to say, this is how bad you've done. Dr. Daniels always talks about remedies. It's very important to get to remedies. So we said it's simple. People have been injured and compensation is due. This commission will determine the amount, the form, and who's eligible to get it. Simple. You know, we could argue about who should get it, we should get it. Should be just Black people in America, Black people in all. You can do all of that all you want until you get this system to say, yes, we're going to give it to you. That's how we say. Those are the main things. And we let people know that New York State was one of the largest, New York City is second largest slaveholding state in the country. And everybody thinks it was a Southern thing. Matter of fact, every time we get off at Rensselaer and Albany, Rensselaer was a slaveholder. And most of the names of the streets in Brooklyn and all of that, Skank and Lavone, all of them were slaveholders. So we built the economy of this country along with the indigenous people who they stole the land for, and therefore the state owes us. And so if we do that in every state, as Dr. Daniels and others fights on the federal level and on the international level that Dr. Daniels fights on, then at some point we can meet. And we ask for $250,000 so people can go out and have the hearings. And it passed by a good margin of votes in the state assembly. And that's the first time in the history of New York State that we got a reparations bill passed. And my comrade Kahlil was very instrumental in helping me push that. So we made history in getting that passed. And now we got to get it past the Senate.
Absolutely. And we've got work to do to make sure that it passes the Senate so that we can actually put this commission together, a community commission. That's right. So that our folks can contribute to making sure that, again, you said it very clearly, our people have been injured. This is our opportunity to make sure there is repair to that injury. Now, let me ask you, council member, systemically, what does reparations on a policy level look like to you? 25,000 still the base number, or will it be adjusted for inflation? Is 25,000 still the base number, or will it be adjusted for inflation?
Well, you know, I'm gonna let the commission determine that, but what I want to caution us to look out for, a lot of reparations initiatives across the country, they're calling stuff reparations that you're supposed to get out of the budget for as taxpaying citizens. Mm-hmm. So don't let your enemy can't determine what the compensation is. So you can't have a fight for reparations, then somebody comes up, Hochul decides, I'm gonna give $10 million for scholarships for reparations. No, you're not. That's something that we should get because you ripped us off in the budget. So these policies around housing and healthcare and employment, all of those things you're supposed to get as tax-paying citizens. Reparations is a debt owed. It's separate from all of that. It's a debt owed. And then a form could be land, could be cash and land, could be healthcare. You know, you can decide that. But I tell people, let's keep it separate. So even if this governor said, I'm putting $1 billion in poverty, that ain't reparations, because this colonial capitalist system created the poverty in the first place. So that's not reparations. And we got to make that clear, that we separate our fight for getting justice out of the budget from a debt owed from enslavement and from Jim Crowism and present day institutional racism.
Absolutely. No double dipping. Ours is ours and ours is a debt paid. We got to make sure that that debt is paid, and what is owed to us currently is separate from what was owed to us in the past. So thank you for that, Councilmember Barron. Let me bring up Dr. Ann Bailey, professor of history at Binghamton University. I have a couple questions in tonight's discussion, and everybody will be able to just jump in on some of these questions, but I have some specific questions I want to ask our panelists. So Dr. Bailey, for you, what does truth and reconciliation mean, and what does that look like for New York State?
For Assemblymember Anderson, first of all, again, thank you. And I just want to say, you know, congratulations on some of those legislative wins that you had within the past year. both on healthcare and economic recovery efforts. So I just want to say that. And also a big shout out to my former student, Monet Schultz, your Deputy Chief of Staff, star student, and an amazing leader on Binghamton University campus. So just a quick shout out. Let me just say that truth and reconciliation, well, I think it means several things. Of course, it brings back to mind the South African model. It was used elsewhere, but that's the model that often comes back to us. And I want to say that that model is maybe, I would like to say here that I really agree with Dr. Daniels, that model has its benefits in the sense that it was helpful in bringing healing to South Africa and bringing all those diverse communities together after apartheid. But the economic remedy, it kind of stopped short. Supposedly the plan was that there would have been reparations at the end of Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but that essentially didn't happen. It certainly didn't happen on any major level, and it still could happen, but where's the political will for it to happen? So for anyone who's listening who may not be too sure about what that model was about, after all those years of apartheid in South Africa and Nelson Mandela and others fighting and the ANC fighting for the end of apartheid, it wasn't until the 1990s that he was restored. He was able to come out of prison, then have an opportunity to be voted in democratically as a leader of South Africa. But then after that, this Truth and Reconciliation Commission was started. And the idea was that there would be some kind of reparations, but they just never got to it. So I want to say that, we don't want that to happen here. I think the model of truth and reconciliation is important. I think we need to do it. But we have to make sure that there's a commitment, a financial commitment from the outset before you start talking about healing and how to heal communities. Let them commit to the money that's needed, the money that has been studied that's needed from the outset. So let me just say that. I don't know if you want me, I had a little bit of a short PowerPoint. I don't know if you want me to share it.
Absolutely, let's run through it. Absolutely.
I don't want to take up too much time because we have so many great people here that I want to hear from, and I'm already learning so much. Thank you, Honorable Charles Barron. Thank you so much for, I have as much to teach as I have to learn, especially about strategy. And I think I'm sitting with people who know so much about that, and I'm happy to be a part of this conversation. So let me just quickly share with you, just for the next 10 minutes, I want to speak to the topic, turning points and the spirit of Harriet Tubman. Turning points and the spirit of Harriet Tubman, why reparations are due now. Now, I am a professor here at SUNY, here at Binghamton University, and while here, I'm also an activist. I'm also somebody very passionate about historical preservation, and I'm the director of the Harriet Tubman Center for Freedom and Equity, which has been in operation since 2019, commemorating the 400th year. As we know, it was earlier than that, but for argument's sake, the 400th year of consistent Black presence in the U.S. Let me say also that I teach African-American history, I teach African history, I teach Caribbean history, essentially the history of people of African descent worldwide. And I'm very committed to a diasporic Pan-African outlook in my teaching. And that's important because it informs some of what I want to share. And some of what I want to share is that particularly for your general public, certainly the panel, this distinguished panel know a lot about this history, but what I have found is that there is this history of erasure. Shall I say that about our history? There are many people in our communities who don't even know why reparations are needed, who can't tell you in a couple of sentences, exactly what it is and why it's needed. And that's not their fault. The fault is our school system. The fault is of the systematic and systemic attempt to kind of erase our past. So that's why I like to share this type of thing as much as I can. So the title is Turning Points in the Spirit of Harriet Tubman, Why Reparations Are Due Now. And so I want to start slide with the story, and this is my book, The Weeping Time, Memory and the Largest Slave Auction in American History. If you're interested, pick it up in the library. It also goes back and goes into some of the history of slavery. But I want to start first with the story of Harriet Tubman. This is the young Harriet Tubman. And Harriet Tubman was born a slave in Dorchester County in the state of Maryland. In about 1844, while she was still a slave, she heard wind from, the community and certainly through the grapevine that she was going to be sold and sold away from her family. And at that point, she planned a very daring escape. She decided that she wouldn't be sold away from her family. She would choose and in fact steal her own freedom and find a way to freedom to the north. She found her way, through that network of the Underground Railroad that we know so well, from one safe house to another, and she eventually got to Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. When she got to Philadelphia, now she was free for the very first time, and that was about 1849. So she's free for the very, very first time. And what she could have done, I want to say, is that she could have just stayed there and, worked as a laundress or a washerwoman or housekeeper, what have you, and just been free. She could have done this, but instead what she did was to realize that her freedom meant nothing, right? It meant nothing if she couldn't share it with her loved ones that she had left behind in Dorchester. And this was the turning point, one turning point for Harriet Tubman. And we often forget that there was that choice that she could have made, where she could have stayed up north, she could have stayed in relative freedom, and not gone back, but instead she went back looking for some of her loved ones, intending to bring at least one of them back with her to Philadelphia. When she got there, she wasn't able to convince any family member to come with her the first trip, but she again faced a choice. Do I, just go back alone, or do I just, try to convince somebody else to come? And in fact, what she did is exactly that. She convinced others, the small group, to come with her, and they went north. So I say this to say she had these series of turning points. And the important thing about the turning points is that she realized that her freedom meant nothing. And I want to say this to people who may be listening, who are doing well, you're doing fine. There's some of us who are doing just fine financially, or you're comfortable and you've got a nice home and this and that and whatnot. And I want to say that, at every turn we have a choice to say, guess what? I'm okay, but is everybody else okay, right? And I think that was the kind of decision that she was making every single time that she faced this turning point. So the second thing is that she decided, in terms of a lesson from this story, that she had to live for a higher purpose, that it wasn't enough to just live for herself or even for others. She had to have a higher purpose. She happened to be a woman of faith, and that guided her in her life and in the entire journey, to become the abolitionist that she was. Again, there was a higher purpose, and she was thinking about others, not just herself and her own freedom. So I say this to say that there were all these turning points, and now I'm going to just zip through some of the things that she did. We know that she became a part of that network herself. That network, the Underground Railroad, included trails in New York. Representative Barron talked about the fact that Honorable Barron talked about the fact that there were many places in New York, all over New York, in fact, that really suggest that there's incredible, connection to slavery and speak to the history of slavery and the legacy of slavery. Well, there are trails of the Underground Railroad, abolition trails up this way as well, unmarked, may I add, and that need to be marked. And that's something that the Harriet Tubman Center is about, that historical preservation of not just Tubman legacy, but also the legacy of Frederick Douglass and others. And in fact, sometimes multicultural group of abolitionists up here who were helpful to escape slaves. After, when the war began in 1861, the Civil War began, you would have thought at that point, Harriet Tubman would have said, that's it, I've done my part. I've been involved with the Underground Railroad, I'm done. No, yet another turning point. She enters the war effort as a spy, leading a raid. The picture that you see here is a major raid that she led called along the Combahee River in South Carolina. So she was actually a military leader, amazing. Other sides of her that we don't even know, but it goes further than that. After the Civil War, that's another picture, just a marker that's there. After the Civil War, she not only leads this effort, but she realizes that, again, she could rest on her laurels, she could go home, just settle down. Instead, what does she do? She, with the help of others, she buys a farm in upstate New York, specifically Auburn, New York. She operates that farm for the benefit of senior citizens. And these are senior citizens, formerly enslaved people who have no reparations. Mind you, the war is over, it's 1865, there's no reparations for her or anybody else. So she's got a home for them that she's built so that they have a place to live, so that they have something to eat, because literally people are hungry and starving. There's nothing coming from the government in any sustained way. This is what she does, yet another turning point. So I want to say this as I close, that what I think is important here is that all these years later, after the war, Harriet Tubman, because of her war effort, was due pension, which was not even reparations, but a pension. And it took her 34 years to get that pension. And this speaks to something that was just said about the fact that there's, what you're due, and then there's what you're owed, right? Mm-hmm. Right? Okay. It just speaks to that. She was due her pension, and she had to fight for it for 34 years. And the pension was just because she was in the war effort. So 4 years to get $20 a month. Okay. And then secondly, she never got reparations. So for anybody wondering why reparations, why they're due, if the great Harriet Tubman, which everybody likes to talk about these days, reparations, in all these generations later, her descendants, right, in America, have seen some gains, but continued inequalities, which we know so well. Reparations are due. Reparations are due. And so I just want to say that after all that contribution that she made, she didn't get it. How much more so, right? The
Absolutely.
Rest of the population.
Absolutely.
And all these centuries later.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Dr. Bailey, for making that very contemporary sort of argument and understanding for people, like taking someone that everybody loves and reveres and connecting it to the concept of the need of our people to be repaired. Folks will march around and say Martin Luther King this and Martin Luther King that. Folks will march around and say Harriet Tubman this and Harriet Tubman that. But you have to understand their fight in the context of where that fight comes from and where it's trying to lead us going forward. So I appreciate that. I have one more question for you before I move on to our next panelist, Dr. Ron Daniels. But my question for you is, what was the most critical piece of information learned about those families and their searches for reconciliation that you spoke about in your book?
In the book Weeping Time, which is about the largest slave auction in US history, I track these enslaved people who were sold in 1859 in Georgia, in Savannah, and scattered throughout the South. And they, like Tubman in 1861, when the war started, many of them got involved in the war effort. So they fought for their own freedom, which is something that I always like to remind people. Like, people weren't given freedom, you got to fight for it for yourself. And they did. And when they got their freedom in 65, a number of those families, and that's the most important thing I learned, were so committed to the concept of family. And I think you see this all over the world. You see it in the Caribbean, wherever the Black people are. You see it here, you see it in the Caribbean, you see it on the continent. The concept of family is a very, very high principle for many people. And one of the damages that I think has been done here in mass media is to suggest that, Black families don't care about being, strong units. And what this book taught me and showed me again is that right after the war, those families that had been split up on the auction block they set out looking for one another with whatever they could find, whatever energy they could find before they got into politics, before they, asserted this right and that right and whatnot. They went looking for one another, and family was key. They didn't always find one another, obviously, but the fact that I was able to find 15% of them in the historical record shows the enduring principle and importance of family life. And I, all I can say is, don't believe otherwise. Our families have issues and challenges just like anybody else, any other community, but there's something there. There's something there. There's a strength there that we need to draw on.
And I appreciate you so much, Dr. Bailey, for mentioning the importance of the Black family as a central part of, one, our liberation, but two, studying our history. When we look at the transatlantic slave trade, when we look at Jim Crow, even when we look at the new Jim Crow, we have to understand that the attack on the Black family is part of how they are successful in dividing us as a people. If you look at the racist former U.S. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, he presented to Lyndon B. Johnson, who was the president at the time, the Negro Report on the Negro family, the Black, talking about how Black families are to blame for their own impoverishment, right? We have to look at how historically the Black family has been the target of destruction of our people. We look at, again, the transatlantic slave trade and that enslavement here in the United States. We look at how they separated families. We look fast forwarding to the civil rights era. Look at how plans were created to separate families. We look at the new Jim Crow right now, mass incarceration, separate the Black family. Absolutely. And so when we talk about the Black family in the context of reparations and liberation, we have to acknowledge the role that the Black family has played in their plans and strategies to help divide us. So I'm glad that you brought that up, Dr. Bailey. And I know one of our other panelists are going to pull that in because they understand the context of this conversation tonight. So thank you, Dr. Bailey. I'm going to bring up Dr. Ron Daniels, who's the president for the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, and also Professor Emeritus at York College. I'm reintroducing all the panelists for folks who are just tuning in. Folks are watching us live on Facebook and in our YouTube archive. So I'm excited that we have our audiences. And to all the audiences who are on our Zoom live, I see some of my civic associations on the call. I see some of our community groups and organizations on the Rockaway Peninsula, in Rosedale, Springfield Gardens, all across the district, all across the neighborhoods where there's Black folks that want to get free who are listening to tonight's program. I really appreciate you for being on the call. Dr. Daniels, thank you so much for being on the call tonight. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and when you begin discussing reparations, how do we educate and empower and inform those who are concerned about the perceived stigma associated with reparations?
Well, let me also just again commend you. I'm enjoying this immensely in terms of you educating, we're learning from each other, but also educating your constituents. And let me just say, and not only am I the president of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, I'm also the convener of the National African American Reparations Commission. And that's kind of what brings me to this conversation. Of course, the IBW created NARC to be an authoritative voice, pulling together veterans who have been working on this for many, 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 many years. And conscious of the fact that your constituents are listening, one of the most important things that you are doing and needs to be done is the education that's taking place now. And to situate it within the context of what's happening, California is already grappling. It already has a commission up and running and has a task force. In fact, they had a major hearing today. They are up and running. It's been passed. They've got a budget and they're moving it. And that's important. It's also important because we live in New York and I want to see New York, get moving as well in terms of moving it over to the top and to the Senate. Not only that, Evanston, Illinois is actually concretely has a reparations program which is small, but nonetheless it is reparations, and it is dispensing to people who have been affected by particularly redlining and other policies, reparations to cope with that. At the national level, as we sit here today, and in my capacity as the convener of NARC, I also have the privilege of, in fact, I worked with Congressman John Conyers for many, many, many years. He was one of my dearest friends in the Congress. And, you know, a part of this, the issue of, if not stigma, a part of what we have been doing, because a part of the damage is the miseducation. It is, and in that regard, it is important to definitionally talk about what reparations is, because reparations is due for the physical, cultural, spiritual, and physical damages are done to a people. And so it's not just physical. Physical is horrific. Now we're talking about the greatest Holocaust in human history, frankly. Millions upon millions and millions of people. But it also damaged our culture. It also, as Malcolm said, the greatest crime committed by Europeans against Africans was to take our names. So he meant that meant culture. And so reparations are about that repair. And in that regard, it is important to also state there are international principles which govern that. So when we look at South Africa, I'm just sort of the Truth and Reconciliation process, for example, there can be, I mean, there's a process. First of all, you must acknowledge that you committed a crime or an injury, and then you must apologize for it. Then you must deal with redress and repair and compensation, and then comes reconciliation at the end of the process. It's not at the beginning of the process. And so really, I would talk about justice and reconciliation. I mean, truth is a part of it, but justice becomes the most important ingredient. And I say that because there's a lot of mythology about the Truth and Reconciliation process in South Africa, and I don't want to just sort of go into detail about it. That was a compromise. And in fact, you know, students of Fagnon and people who are psychiatrists said that was kind of brutal for us to internalize this damage. And at the end of the day, it was like people could come and confess and say, yeah, I killed your grandmother and I slaughtered somebody and I confessed to it. And then, you know, it's, you know, and there was no real penalty, right? And it plays into this myth that the people can absorb this pain. You remember when the people were killed in South Carolina? Oh, look how they just forgive. Well, I want to be a forgiving people, but that's not what it's about, because quite frankly, that is not healthy for us to ingest and take in all of that trauma. And there are studies now that have been pointing out that by our psychiatrists, which is always good while we have Afrocentric and African-centered psychology, that we have epigenetic cross-generation. It is in our genes have been damaged across generations. So when COVID hits, there is a predisposition of large numbers of our people already to, in fact, be damaged by something like COVID. So that becomes an important piece. I also just want to address something that Charles Barron said that is incredibly important in terms of how we understand reparations, because we're battling some of these issues out across the country today. And that is the party that inflicts the injury by definition cannot define the remedy. That's by definition. You can't say, I can't like steal your car and then say, oh, I'm sorry, well, I'll give you a bicycle. I mean, you know, the principle is that if you injured, you go through the process, and the person, party, or group that was injured, it must define the nature of the remedy. And it also must have independent resources to administer whatever the remedy is in whatever forms that it might take. That's an important piece. The other thing that is important too, because, and I say this because there's so much energy now, I'm not really concerned about stigma. No. What has happened across generations, that cross generations from Harriet Tubman not getting her pension to Kahlil House, you know, organizing literally thousands and thousands of people. She did not succeed per se, but she drove the process forward, right? And Marcus Garvey drove the process forward. And Queen Mother Moore, my mentor, And thank God for Queen Mother Moore, because here was I was a young, I think you cited, it was then called Graduate School of Public Affairs. It's now the Rockefeller School. But then it was just a Graduate School of Public Affairs that's beginning to start up, where I met Queen Mother Moore. And Queen Mother Moore said she was a brain surgeon. Her job was to operate on constipated minds. And mine was one of them. I am forever thankful for her for liberating me. I didn't know nothing about reparations. How is it that I could be getting ready to matriculate for a master's degree and didn't know nothing about reparations? So we have to give her credit. And then there are other organizations and COBA and so forth that have driven this struggle forward. So now, I mean, people may be trying to understand a little bit better, but reparations is hot, it's on fire. I mean, municipalities all across this country are spawning reparations initiatives. In order to get it passed in the House of Representatives, it takes 218 votes. The bill under Congressman Conyers, which was a study bill, and we used it as an organizing tool to educate. Because early on, I mean, here we were saying, well, I don't believe in reparations, or why are we dealing with that? It's not even possible. We had to first persuade ourselves. We had to persuade ourselves. We ain't got to persuade ourselves no more. Now about 75% of Africans in America believe in reparations. That is a huge victory. And so today, with 218 votes required, the Conyers bill, which was a study bill, never got more than 50 votes. Not because it could not have gotten more than 50 votes. We were using it as an organizing tool to say, can't we just at least study this? I mean, it was the basic denominator. But we rewrote that bill. As Charles Barron pointed out, we said, look, we've done enough studies. We knew we had done enough studies already. And to NCOBA's credit, they were tactically smart enough to say, as revolutionaries, as Black nationalists and Pan-Africanists, because that's where it came from. Let's be clear. This is not getting embraced by the elites and the talented 10th and so forth and so on. This was embraced. This came from the masses of Black nationalists and Pan-Africanists who already knew the studies. They knew the history. But tactically, they said, we are willing to have a study bill so we can educate more about people. But then we rewrote that bill to a bill that now states we are going to study, but it is to study and to develop reparations proposals, which is the remedy phase. It's not just studying. And that's something to be very clear about as well. And so let me just say too, and because it's a little disjointed, but I'm making these points because I think they're incredibly important.
No, it's all connected.
Education, the educational value, I'm telling you, I have learned some stuff today that I did not know. I was in a conversation last night, Haki Matabudi's his 80th birthday. And there was a sister who worked at the Schomburg, and they were talking about the African burial ground. And of course, Councilman Charles Barron had a leading role in helping to rescue that, and would not rest until our ancestors were. But then I'm saying, they were saying, when they began to look at because people talk about our Africanness, and they said that when they unearthed people, they had on their bodies, they had symbols from the Igbo symbols, the Yoruba. I did not know that. Now I knew you see, but that's when you have people initially who didn't want to be Black, didn't want to be African, all that kind of stuff, to understand who we are as an African people becomes important. To understand that enslavement was not just down south, it was up south big time. Over in New Jersey, I was listening to Ron Hagar talk about stuff. I mean, goodness gracious, the amount of enslaved African. And so our people need to know that moving forward. And that means that one of the most brutal, the most crucial things is not only the brutality of the matter, it's the wealth of this nation. Its commercial and industrial revolution was built on the brutal extraction of labor from Black people, from African people. And so they owe us, we are due. And so the question becomes tracing that and excavating it. And in that regard, it is not just enslavement. It is all, and the Councilman Barron laid this out, because that has to be clear too. It is all of the subsequent policies. Claude Anderson, Black Labor, White Wealth. I mean, the Homestead Act. I mean, a whole lot of white folks, they say, well, I don't know about you. No, you were able to benefit from the Homestead Act. We couldn't. Now it's unequal because we also live in a capitalist political economy. And so we got some white folks on the bottom who don't understand they're on the bottom. That's their problem. And that has been a problem. But they benefited. just as how Europe underdeveloped Africa, these financial institutions have benefited. That was a benefit. So what happens is, and when you start digging and excavating, we find how much Black people, our people, contributed and how much was stolen from us. And then how intentionally, if you go to Evanston, the record was right there in terms of redlining. They actually moved Black people from this district over to this district so they could have prosperous areas for white folks and devalue the property of Black folks, which meant that the wealth gap shrunk in terms, was widened in terms of our participation. So I just want to say that I think these forums are important. We learn from them. I learn from them. We educate our people through them. And so that's the kind of thing that's moving. The other thing is, I have to emphasize the difference between even equity policy. Equity policy is great. We want to, that people are now looking at equity. Equity is for saying from now, henceforth, and forevermore, we will apply an equity lens to make sure that that's moving forward. That has nothing to do with the past. Reparations is about what is due to us. It has equity, it's great. I'm not disparaging it. Let's do equity. It's not either or, we need both. And the final thing is we have to distinguish it from what I call ordinary public policy. There's some issues right now. People need jobs, housing, that's fine. But, and we need to do that and push for that vigorously. But at the end of the day, that's not reparations. Reparations is a set of definitions, and we are do that. And we are on the verge. There's a moment of racial reckoning in this country because of our movement. And let's be clear about it. We are the ones, and there have always been allies, and I'm not disparaging that, but we have been the driving force in terms of taking it to this point. And we're on the verge of getting HR 40 by legislation, more likely by executive order, done. That will not be the end. Then we have to still battle and struggle and organize to make sure that certain ideas are put out there. In that regard, let me just quickly say we have a 10-point program in the National African American Reparations Commission. If you go to the website, ibw21.org, ibw21.org, you can see the 10-point program. You can see a lot of the work that we've done in terms of Evanston and those kind of things that are happening. So I am confident that we're in the right place. So let me just quickly answer the second question quickly, because it's already there. We are Pan-Africanists.
How do we grapple with who gets reparations?
Who should get it? And that's becoming a big question. Who should get it, right? And everybody should get it. Everybody should get it. Why? Because we have people who are saying, first of all, because it's not just for enslavement. But even if it's for enslavement, we can't determine, nor should we try to determine necessarily, who were, quote unquote, the American descendants of slavery. Now let me hip you to something in terms of our political movement. How many times do we have movements in this country that start with American in them? Almost never. But we don't roll like that. We'll say African Americans, we'll say Black Americans, we'll say Africans, so forth, because we, in our hearts and our bones, we ain't quite with that American thing yet. It's kind of implicit, right? So when somebody come out with something saying American, you say, And so what we have is people who are trying to create an ethnicity, a particular group. And what it is nativists. It is against the notion that somehow we have some Africans coming over here, some Caribbean people coming over, and they taking our jobs, and we need, which is like, that's not who we are. We're Pan-Africanists. I want as many Black people as possible to come. I want more. Open this flood, come over in here, big time. And let us now create an alliance with our Native American brothers and sisters so we can really get this country straightened around. So I'm not trying to reject folks from coming out. We're going to talk about Shirley Chisholm's people are not eligible. Malcolm's relatives are not eligible. And when they tortured Amadou Louima, they didn't ask him where he was from, nor when they took out Amadou Diallo. And Malcolm said, we all get oppressed because we're Black people. Now let me quickly say something else about that. The reality is, if you live in a community that has been underdeveloped because of redlining, you didn't have to be, these are the legacies of enslavement. So if you got here 5 years ago, you're coming into what? An underdeveloped community. So we have two kinds of benefits. One kind of benefits is called direct benefits. That means you can get a check, you can get some kind of direct benefit. But you also have community benefits, which are in some ways more important in some ways. How do you rebuild community? Tulsa, for example, even if, and they're all entitled to it, all the folks, and we have people who are 100 years old who have yet to get their direct benefits. But even if all of the descendants got their benefits, how do you rebuild Black Wall Street? How do you rebuild the community? And so we need to talk about community benefits that accrue to us as a people. Land, for example, Native Americans, we got to still hang with them, keep them building. They have not gotten all they should, but they do have quasi-sovereignty over huge tracts of land. They can do education, whatever. They can do casinos. I am with that proposition, but they can. We need land, and there's huge amounts of federal land. We should be given some of that federal land so we can build our own institutions and govern them on our land. So two types of benefits, direct benefits, community benefits. As far as I'm concerned, I can't think of no Black person who would not be eligible for some aspect and some form of reparations. So forgive me for being a little long. I apologize, but I just wanted to get all those points out.
No. You're right on target, Dr. Daniels, and I thank you so much for giving us that very important perspective. And I know we're going to have a number of questions for all of our panelists in the chat, both on our live stream and in the chat tonight. So we're going to definitely revisit some of the pieces we talked about tonight. Well, let me bring up Sister Tia Struther, who's the project manager for the Black Freedom Project as a statewide organizer. We're so gracious to have you on the call, Sister Tia. Tell us a little bit about who you are and answer this question. It's a very important first question. We're very, very much so, as our panelists have outlined, at a very, very crucial time in New York State for Black people and across this state. If we're talking about reparations as a Black wellness tool, what are our people asking for? So tell us about who you are and tell us what our people are asking for.
Yes. So thanks again for having me. Like you said, my name is Tia Struther. I'm a native of Bed-Stuy. My family has been in this neighborhood specifically for 6 generations. And so we're deeply rooted in Brooklyn and in our Black community. Just a little bit about the Black Freedom Project. So we established ourselves in 2019, and we basically, the vision was born out of, Black organizing and organizations recognizing the importance of really galvanizing with each other around intersecting issues. Everything is related to each other: housing, land, economic stability, quality schools and education. And, oftentimes organizing can get stuck into silos. And we're trying to disrupt that and really build Black power amongst each other and really disrupt the separation that the nonprofit structure has gotten us into. And so how do we actually build with each other in a way that is collectively healing, is able to push political priorities, economic priorities, and really just end this war on Black people? Because that's what everything we're talking about here, us being refused our reparations, us, being in, communities that are constantly disrupted and traumatized. That is a war. It's a war on Black folks. And so how do we actually build the power to dismantle that and eliminate that dynamic? So that's just a little bit about Black Freedom Project. In terms of what folks are asking for, we just recently deployed a community survey project throughout New York State. And we interviewed almost a little bit over 2,000 Black New Yorkers in Rochester, throughout New York City, in Buffalo, in the Albany region, Schenectady, et cetera, asking them what community safety looks like for them. What is it to build community safety? What do they need? And overwhelmingly, there's a range of different things that folks are asking for, but the themes are still the same. Folks want quality mental health and health services in their communities and programs. They want quality education for their kids. They want youth programs. They want, dignified infrastructure in their communities. They want, transportation and sanitation services that are reliable and functioning. So those are some of the common themes that has come out of, us having these conversations with folks. And I can definitely tell you the one thing that was always on the bottom of the list was more police. right? Because I think our folks have finally realized that police do not keep us safe, and they actually contribute to the violence and the trauma of our communities.
The violence, the trauma, and the continued harm of our communities. And I'm, folks who know me know that I think it's important for us to move towards a system that allows us and empowers us to do better for ourselves and protect ourselves. I also think that we need a system that focuses on us investing in ourselves. Safety, to me, and to many of our folks in our neighborhoods, looks like investment. And it looks like making sure that the things that are missing are there so that our families and our communities can be whole. And we've got to look towards that vision. And we have to make sure we invest in and towards that vision. So I thank you so much, Tia. And Brother Barron wants to jump in on that. Come on in, Brother
Barron.
You said
something interesting, the system. If we get paid reparations tonight and we still living on the American plantation, that reparations will be put right back in the same system that gave it to us.
Absolutely.
So reparations without liberation is a problem. And then there's but a few ways that you can get reparations, whether it's through legislation, through litigation, there were some people who took it to court, or in the streets, because most of our legislation moves forward because of the street action. I bet most of us don't even know who was the sponsors in Congress of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. Well, we know Martin Luther King and the movement, and Malcolm X said, if you don't give King, we're going to tear this place up. So, but on reparations, Dr. Daniels, all of us did a great presentation. I was reading in this book and it's a great book on a whole history of reparations. And it starts with Belinda Sutton in 1780. She actually got it, and we need to read it. Tunis Campbell in 1865. You should read about what happened with him. And of course, Queen Mother Moore and Jordan Anderson. So it's a great book. Wait a minute. Oh, it's my book. I'm sorry. Oh my God. It's my book, Dr.
There we go. There we go.
It was my book. If you can get this book, you'll appreciate it, Kahlil, because I got some stuff on what we did up in Albany in here. But I wrote a book called Speaking Truth to Power, and you can go on Barnes and Nobles. And
Brother Barron, scooch it up a little bit so people can see the full title. Move it up a little bit. Yeah.
It's Speaking Truth to Power. It's let me back up there.
Yeah.
It's essays on revolution, Black radical politics, and leadership. I have about 90 articles in here. You're gonna love it. Kahlil, you're especially gonna love it. But you can go to Barnes and Nobles and put my name as the author in, and you'll get it. And Dr. Daniels has a great book too. I hope he shows his book. He has a great book that he's written. I read his and mine every other day just to get up on this stuff. But I'm so excited about this forum. You did a awesome job. And when we tell our people, because when you get out there arguing, this white class said, I didn't enslave you. Why should I have to pay? I didn't enslave you. My people came during the turn of the century. I said, I don't care if you came here last night.
That's right.
You know, the system enslaved us, and you're benefiting from that enslavement, so you have to pay the debt. I didn't do anything to the Japanese, but they got reparations in 1988, 1 point some odd billion from Ronald Reagan in them. I didn't intern the Japanese on concentration camps. So it's not what you do once you come to a country, is what the country did historically. You owe us, and you better pay us reparations, because we're getting tired, and pretty soon we ain't gonna be talking about voting and demonstrating, and all of that stuff is gonna say, you ain't listening to nothing.
That's right.
Inevitably, people are gonna be talking about scorched earth if you don't do something. On our identity, Dr. Clark said it best. You're not who you are based upon where the boats dropped you off. You're who you are based upon where they picked you up from. And they picked us all up from Africa and then dropped us all over the place. And matter of fact, people don't want only Africans who were born in America. The early Africans came from the Caribbean because they broke them in the Caribbean and brought them here. So we are, and Dr. Daniels makes a good point there. So I'm just excited about this time that we're living in, not only for reparations, but for revolution. And we need to look at a different kind of system than the colonial capitalist system. We need to look at socialism and the African origins of socialism. When you hear the word communism, think about communalism. In Africa, these are systems that was more collective, owned by the people, and not by the corporation. So revolution is a solution as we go about to get our reparation. Oh, one last thing on that Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. How dare they? The highlights of that was trying Winnie Mandela. You know, they hit Winnie Mandela and right, wrong, whatever, but how does she become the major issue for the Truth and Reconciliation? And we just we got to look at the state of neo-colonialism. Another good book I would recommend, Kwame Nkrumah wrote a book, Neo-Colonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism. That's what's happening in New York State. Look at all the blacks in power. Head of the Senate, black. Head of the Assembly, black. Attorney General, black. Public Advocate, black. Mayor, black. Police chief, black. Head of the Democratic Party in Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Queens, all black. The Speaker of the City Council, black. Black faces in high places doesn't mean black power, or doesn't mean the masses are going forward. That's neo-colonialism, and New York State is the #1 neo-colonial state because all these blacks are wedded to the Democratic Party and to Wall Street, and so they espouse this, they're proxies for the same policies that we suffer from.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Brother Barron. And for Tia, who is in this space as an organizer in this space, speaking to our people, fighting for liberation in the context that our Brother Barron laid out just now, what would you say is one of the most exciting things, the most exhilarating things about organizing our people towards this liberation and this freedom in your capacity, both your personal and professional capacity, sister? Talk about it.
I think there's two major things. I mean, one, I think the most exciting thing is that there is a widening awakening amongst our people. And we're really, you know, developing a shared political framework and an understanding, whether or not you have the language or the terminology, you know, because we could get real elitist about that. You know, if you sit and take the time to talk to folks, we're arriving at the same conclusions. And that's really exciting because, you know, being able to build together first starts with having a shared understanding. And I would say the second thing is that we're recognizing, and I think Brother Charles mentioned it earlier, that there's a delusion of where the power really lies. And we're really starting to understand that we have to reclaim our power. We actually have to believe that we have it first before we can exact it. And so the fact that folks are realizing that power comes from the roots and not from the tip of the grass, that's really exciting for us.
All right.
Wow.
Right on.
Thank you so much, Sister Tia. I think that Dr. Bailey had her hand up, and then we're going to open up to question and answer.
I just want to thank you all for this because I am learning so much. I want to share too this, you know, when you talk about, you know, what's the state of people's minds, particularly when you have representatives in high places who look like us but don't, you know, are not necessarily thinking for the entire community. That kind of brings to mind, you know, Ngugi's book about decolonization of the mind and like how important it is for minds to be changed and mindsets. And that then takes me to the freedom schools. And I'm thinking about that a lot these days, you know, the freedom schools of the 60s. And, you know, you got to get to people. I mean, just like how Sister Tia was out there talking to people and finding out what's on their mind. There's a way I think we need to kind of go back to reaching people and sharing enough. We can't inundate them with all the history, but just enough to give them a sense of purpose collective purpose and drive to really be the ones that make the change. Because if you don't know, what's happened before, you don't really know where you fit in and what you need to be doing, and it might be much easier for you to just kind of buy the okie doke, which is like, look, I'm just going to get mine, right? I'm just going to get something for myself and I don't care about anybody else, and not make those decisions that will sometimes involve sacrifice, often involve sacrifice, as all of you all know, especially those who've been carrying this torch much longer than most of us, like Brother Daniels and Brother Barron. So, I just put that out there. Like, we got to have some, I really believe in those freedom schools, those after school programs and ways, short, 2-3 weeks, whatever, get into people, whether you use in person, on the net, whatever, what you're doing right now, assembly member, having these community conferences. I don't think you can do this enough if you're going to awaken the sleeping giant, I like to say.
And it's so important that you put it into that context. When I talk about, and I definitely promise I'm gonna get to question and answers, but when I talk about my upbringing and talk about the struggle that I've gone through for liberation, to get our people free, whether it's fighting against police brutality, fighting to make sure that our schools are adequately funded, making sure that we're doing our part as Black men, but Black folks in this space to help get all of our people liberated, right? We talked about this being a collective struggle.
Sure.
I think about my upbringing in having even a short privilege of being educated by African Shule. Like, that helped build my awareness. That helped build the opportunity for us to understand that this is a collective struggle. Whether it was my mom taking me to the African American Museum, Black museums, just keeping us surrounded around Black culture is critical in a young person's development, but in a community's development. And when you see arts and culture being underfunded in our schools, that's an attempt again to separate us from our culture. So it's important to acknowledge that the context of where we are as in a society. But this chat is humming with questions. So let me get in here. First, let me thank our panelists for telling us a little bit about themselves, but also telling us their perspective on how reparations should work, how our state budget should work, and what does liberation mean for our people. So we have over 18 plus people on the Zoom call, dozens more on our YouTube and our Facebook pages. So we're excited for the level of engagements that we're seeing happen all across our platform. So let me get right to it with some of these questions. So we had a question from one of our audience members from the Edgemere Community Civic Association here in the Rockaways. Good evenings. Will this reparations bill be only in New York State, or is it in every state? What are the stipulations, and how will you determine who will be a part of the reparations? That's the first part of their question. And then it says the question was answered by Dr. Daniels, but just a perspective that we should discuss. There are Black Americans who are actual descendants of slaves who might feel differently about all Black folks receiving reparations. So can we just answer that in two parts, starting with Dr. Daniels, since it was directed towards you, and followed by any one of the panelists that want to jump in. So just to reiterate, is this reparations bill only for New York State, or is it considering other states? Is it considering other states, and how will we determine who will be a part of reparations? And the second part is asking and posing the questions who Black Americans who are actual descendants of slaves might feel differently about all Black folks receiving reparations. Talk about it.
Yeah, well, quickly, as I was pointing out, we got California is already up and running. Right next door, New Jersey is pushing forward with a reparations initiative. Maryland is involved. So there are states that are coming on board to have state initiatives. Ever since the first city to do a reparations initiative, we just had a symposium where we brought leaders together from over 25 cities from all across the country. So cities are coming on board all across the country. So it is a flourishing, blooming movement. No question about that. And so to the last question, I'm sure there may be some people who see themselves, quote unquote, as Black Americans who don't think that all Black people should get reparations. that's an opinion, and certainly some people might feel that way. But the question is, why would they feel that way? What is it if we as Black people who celebrate Kwanzaa and talk about Ujima, collective work and responsibility, Ujamaa, cooperative economics, and we're now talking about me, myself, and I instead of we, us, and our? See, the question is, why is that? Well, where is that coming from? Now, does that mean we don't have issues and whatnot? We do. I mean, ethnicity is important, and people come and they come from different places. And I'm often reminded by my dear beloved sister Shashi McIntyre. She once said to me, she said, "Ron, skin color is important, but in the real world, ethnicity also matters. People come from different ethnic groups, they identify that way, and whatever." But the bottom line is, irrespective of what our ethnicities are, from a definitional point of view, white supremacist system have defined us as one across the board. So Malcolm said we all catch hell, for the same reason. So the point is, and that's why, by the way, and we're gonna grab you, Tia. We have something called a Pan-African Unity Dialogue, and we're looking for. And Charles, you know about it. You've been there. We meet, and so I'm gonna get you because we want to pull, because we're looking at ways and what we have in that Pan-African Unity Dialogue. We have continental Africans, we have Afro-Latinos, Afro descendants from the Central America and South America. We have Caribbean Americans and so-called African Americans. We're all in the room. Why? Because we want to make sure that the fact that we're occupying the same space and look alike does not mean that we're working together. We want to make sure that we're working together. And so we are Pan-Africanists. We aspirationally want to see Black people working together in order to achieve Black power. And so there'll be some people who will selfishly say, I just want mine. Well, that tendency is a tendency that ultimately can be very divisive and very destructive. So again, it's not just about enslavement. It is also about other redlining. You probably live in a community that's been redlined. You're in a community that's been victimized by police brutality. You may have had a father who fought, or in those days would have been father, who fought in the war and didn't get the GI Bill, or the federal housing. All these things are warranted reparations. So it's hard to find a Black person who would not be eligible for reparations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Daniels. And Tia, take a hit at that one, and we're going to jump into the next question.
Yeah, I was just going to add, anytime that I've been posed that question or come across it, I ask simply, are you being asked your ethnicity when we're being shot in the streets? When we're being barred access? Are they sitting here trying to parse out what Black ethnicity you are when you can't get housing loans, or, your kids are going to horrible, schools? And that's it. It's a very simple answer. We don't even have to get into the higher end politics of it. That's not what they're looking at. So simply put, Black folks are owed, all Black folks.
Right. I'll tell you something else. The Japanese, when they got theirs, 1.6 billion, 1.2 billion, it was 20,000 each for the Japanese that were actually interned on concentration camps in 1940s. And then another 500 million for their descendants, wherever they came from. They didn't sit there and say, only us that was interred. They gave it to everybody. And the same thing with Jews. There's the city council gave up millions of dollars for Jews who were affected by the Holocaust. America had nothing to do with the Holocaust. That was over in Germany, and they got some reparations for what Germany did. And so we need to just stop that. That's why when the commissions come together, you bring your argument, like Dr. Daniel said, that's your argument, bring it to the commission, and then when we resolve it, we'll see. Some people say we owed $4 trillion. Amali Yeshiteli and them in 1982 said $4 trillion. Others say $6 trillion. And then the people say, well, $6 trillion, the national budget is only $5 trillion. Say, well, we'll take a down payment of $1 trillion. You can just
an IOU
down payment. And see, what we're talking to Biden right now, you know what he could do tonight? Biden can do two things. One, he can call up Dr. Daniels and say, you know what? We're going to do a presidential commission on HR 40. He can call up Viola Plummer, who's saying we want a $50 billion down payment for healthcare as reparations and say, I'm going to do that. When Barack Obama wanted to put money in for education, he called a special presidential executive order, took $4 billion out of the Department of Education and said, for all of you who raise charter schools and teacher evaluations, I'm going to give you $700 million each. A presidential executive order didn't have to go through Congress. Biden can do that tonight.
And that's important to acknowledge. Thank you so much, Brother Barrett. Dr. Bailey, you want to get in on this? And we got.
I know, because I don't want to hold you up.
No worries.
With other new questions, but you know, I didn't want to take too much time, but I was born in Jamaica. I'm a U.S. very proud U.S. citizen for a long time, but I was born there, and I still keep a good tie to the Caribbean, as well as a strong tie to the continent of Africa. So I'm thoroughly, not just in theory, but like in very practice. I'm in practice, literally, you know, connected to all these various places, and I'm very Pan-African. So I just want to say, like, I totally endorse Dr. Daniels and City Councilman, you know, Barron. I just endorse the way that you're looking at it, because, and that needs to be heard and understood. And plus, you're being generous to say, look, it's okay, you can have a different point of view, but hear me out. Let me try to persuade you, and I think you're very persuasive. But let me also add, there's just two pieces of this which are also important to think about. One is the history that when you were captured, the brother and sister that's captured on the West or Central African coast, right? And they're put on that Middle Passage journey, those ships during the Middle Passage, they may drop a brother off in Jamaica, and the sister, they drop over here in the US. So don't nobody tell us whose family, okay? Don't nobody on the outside get to tell us whose family, when I've seen those records for myself. We don't even know how connected we are. That's the problem. We don't even know. And people can divide and conquer as long as you don't know. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, though, the fact is, and it's true, that if you're not careful, people on the outside of the community will try to privilege some groups over others. I've seen it. I know that's true. And some of us need to just be clear about that. And if we get an in somewhere, we need to bring the others along. You know, whoever gets that in needs to just keep thinking Pan-African from a larger perspective. But sometimes too, we need to say, you know what, maybe I don't need it, but somebody else needs it more. So I just want to put that out there. Not that everybody isn't due, do you know what I'm saying? But that sometimes we need to make some of those other calculations, those other nuanced calculations as well. Some of us can step back and say, I'm going to make a way for others, just the way Harriet Tubman did. Others take that opportunity and make sure that you're bringing others along who they didn't call to the table. Does that make sense? So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. Next question that we have from one of our audience members. It says, I cannot help but to notice the flags in Dr. Daniels and Assemblymember Anderson's backgrounds. What do these flags mean to you? So I'll let you answer it first, Dr. Daniels, but for folks who can't see my flag, I have the Black Liberation flag hanging up in my room where I sleep, right above my head. And if you pan to the left, Dr. Daniels has the Haitian flag. So you first, Dr. Daniels, what do these two flags mean to you? And then I'll.
Well, I actually have the Haitian flag and the red, black, and green. I try to always show them both, right? So I have the red, black, and green too, because the red, black, and green is the universal African flag, which is what Marcus Garvey intended to be. The red for the blood and suffering of our ancestors, the black for the color and culture of our people, and the green for the land that was stolen from us that we were recaptured to build our nation, sort of metaphorically speaking. And Marcus Garvey, the greatest mass organizer that Black people have ever seen. And we really need to know a lot more about Marcus Garvey. In fact, his son, Dr. Julius Garvey, on the 26th is launching Garvey Television. And we're working with him because the Institute of Black World 21st Century, under the leadership of a brother named Don Rojas, is launching Black World Media Network as well. So there's some really good stuff happening. The Haitian flag to me is incredibly important for this reason. Haiti, the Haitian people are the only people, is the only time in history where an enslaved people rose up against their slave masters and created a republic. We created an independent nation. And Haiti did that, and they were punished for shattering the myth of white supremacy and have been, so we all, to me, we all owe a debt to Haiti. And when you trace the history, and I've been to Haiti so many times, I just devoted a lot of my life to working around Haiti. I was thinking, if you think about Denmark Vesey, the largest slave rebellion in the country, somebody told, but it was the largest slave. Where was he going? He was going to Haiti. Why? Because Haiti was the symbol of possibilities. Even the early part of the NAACP, in the era of segregation, even though Haiti was under, in fact, they fought against the occupation. The NAACP did. Because what Haiti showed was, when people were saying, "Oh, y'all black people are inferior," they said, "No, Haiti, this is independence. They were an independent nation." So we all owe a special debt to Haiti. And quite frankly, until Haiti is free, I argue that none of us really will be truly free. We really need to work to vindicate and validate them. And let me just say, finally, in that regard, because many of us come from a kind of spiritual foundation, people tend to know one or two people, just like you know Martin Luther King. If you know anything about Haiti, you probably know Toussaint Louverture. You might be fortunate enough to know Dessalines, but the person you also ought to know is Boukman, because Boukman was the spiritual leader who, in fact, to me, inspired the Haitian revolutionaries to say, "We don't care what you bring in. Now, you can bring anything you want to bring, because we believe in a God who's on our side, and that God will be our liberator." So that's why I'm proud to always have this Haitian flag here.
Every American should be dedicated to Haiti, because they were beating Napoleon so badly that the French had to sell a Louisiana Purchase just to get some stuff. So half of America was because of the Haitian Revolution, because America was small. Then when they bought all of that with the Louisiana Purchase, because Napoleon sold all of that and still got his butt whipped. And they got a nerve to say that Haitians should pay France reparations?
What?
And that's quickly too. And also Haitians fought in the Revolutionary War, fought in the Battle of Savannah, a crucial war. In fact, that's where they learned a lot of the military prowess, and they didn't turn that against the French. But that was not enough by itself. It wasn't that, because the masses of the people was with cutlasses and spears and just guts. I mean, just overwhelming them. I mean, they said, "What the hell is happening?"
It's true. And, my response is much the same from you, Dr. Daniels. I go to sleep and wake up to this Pan-African flag, because this is the flag I've seen in my house growing up. I've never seen the bars and the stripes in my house growing up. I always saw the red for our blood, the black for the beautiful richness and the color of our skin, and the green for the lands that we have all across the 54 beautiful countries on the continent of Africa. That is our true home. For me, the Haitian flag means liberation. It's a flag of a people who have fought against all odds to secure their freedoms. These are the Davids and the Goliaths, if you will, the folks that were always discounted in many of these aspects. And so these are people that rose up. I see myself in that flag and the flag above my bed, because every day we wake up that we're fighting against systemic racism and oppression is us channeling our inner Haitian. It's us channeling our inner Black American. It's us channeling that sense of taste for freedom and true liberation. So it's important. And I'm glad whoever asked that question, that you asked it, because the things that we have around our house, the things that we have around our spaces. You see Brother Barron got Brother Malcolm X behind him. I have a painting of Malcolm X in my district office. And so you could always tell who a person is and what they're about based off of what they have in their spaces of thinking, in their spaces of work, in their spaces of art. Look at Sister Dr. Bailey, got the black paintings behind her in her room, in her space. So this is
African-American artists.
all of that. And I think Sister Tia's got some stuff back there. I'm trying to take a look, but I can't really see. But she got some stuff going on back there. So I'm glad whomever asked that question. Let me jump to this next question that we got from our audience. How do you all, and I guess it's open to everyone, how do you all view the debate about critical race theory? That's open for anybody. How do you all?
Well, critical race theory really does not even exist. It was not happening in any of those places that the right-wing conservatives were talking about. And it started off around law, you know, with Bell and Crenshaw and others. It was about law focusing on class, and they wanted law to start focusing on race as well. Then they took that and brought it into some political arena to make it seem as, oh, you're going to tell the children about racism and they're going to hate, and it's going to divide people, and they're going to hate this one and hate that one. Some people said, just tell the truth and let the chips, you don't need a special theory and all of that. Just tell the truth about American history and let the chips fall where they may. But they use that. And it's, you know, it's like when they say socialism. There is no socialism in America. All of the problems is capitalism. That's the system. So they bring up these theories and these arguments about stuff that, you know, it's not existing in the school system. And then they start saying they're going to take books out and stuff like that. And then they have a way of framing the issue. So they'll keep you in a framework because they want you to talk more about racism than colonial capitalism. Because you know, you just talk about both. But when you talk about racism, we don't have any black presidents. All right, here's a black president. Is now racism going? Oh, we need more black lawyers, or more black this, or more black that, or race. They're keeping us out of that. We need more housing. We got to fight for those things. But if you only fight around racism and not colonialism and capitalism that's producing all of this, then you're fighting for inclusion and diversity and equity in a system that's fatally flawed, needs to be dismantled and radically altered.
Thank you so much, Brother Barron. Anybody else want to take a whack at
that? Let me do a quick one on that because I really enjoy teaching a great deal. And when I teach, I'm always pushing people to think critically, and just like Queen Mother Moore operated on my mind, I said, well, I got to do the same thing. So in my, my teaching experience, many years, I'm proud that I had an opportunity to touch a number of students. One of them was Professor Kimberly Crenshaw. She was a student.
All right.
Really?
And just one class, but in the early formative stages, and she has far surpassed me. I mean, she is like way out there. I mean, she is brilliant. But in them early stages, when getting people to think, and differently about the nature of things. And so the other thing I would say this, Dr. John Henry Clark said that white nationalism is the enemy of black nationalism. So we see clearly, and this is why people have to be very clear about what we're doing, is that, and back in the day, we used to say that a system, the dying gasp of the system, it would be vicious and brutal. And that's what you really see. I mean, you have people, because America was, and when I teach at your college and I say this, and the students, we get they get nervous. I said, look, no, we racial and ethnic politics. And I start with the proposition that America was always intended to be a white man's land. They say, why is he saying that? I said, no. I'm going to say like Malcolm said. Malcolm said, I will present you with documented evidence. And that's what we do. Starting in 1792, right on, we just pointed out point by point by point. It was intended to be a white man's land, not even men and women, man's land, right? And so there are people who are clinging to that and do not want to give that up. And they're coming from a perspective of white nationalism. We're coming from the perspective of Black nationalism in the sense that we believe in our people and we believe that we should be free and liberated. And by the way, we've always been a people from the ancient Kemetic notion of Ma'at who believe in justice and righteousness. That's why when we said Black power, Native Americans said red power. Older people even said gray power. We have been in the cutting edge of that politics of social transformation. So that's important because we have to use all of the tools at our disposal in order to push both. Some of it is in the form of reform. Reform is okay as long as you have your eyes on revolution.
There you go.
There's a relationship between reform and what I call the politics of, I see it a little bit different than Charles sometimes. He's a little more bodacious than me and so forth, and I've gotten a little older perhaps or whatnot. But it's the same thing. We're talking about the same thing. And let me just say this. So therefore, one of the great contributions that Charles Barron has made, he and his lovely queen have made, is to demonstrate to people that, that revolution has to be fought on all fronts. So you have a system that's problematic, but you must engage that system in order to transform that system. Maulana Karinga says, we are realistic, but as for reality, we have come to change it. That's another way of saying it, right? And so we have to really think about that. So you're pushing it as hard as you can, and you're educating, which is what you're doing, Assemblyman Anderson, which is so incredibly important. I mean, you're standing on the legacy of those of us who came out of the Black Power conferences. We talked about what we wanted elected officials to be. We did not want to simply exchange white faces for Black faces in powerful places. That's not what we were talking about. We were talking about the ability to get in power, push the envelope, but also build and educate your constituency the way you're doing. And I applaud you for that, because unfortunately, as time went on, people simply got used to being in these spaces, and therefore, they became systematized. And it's like Malcolm said, between your coffee black and strong, and then after a while you put so much cream in it till once it would wake you up, and now it'll put you to sleep. So anyway, forgive me I just wanted to point that out, because I just want to applaud you for what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Daniels. And I think the word you're looking for too, Dr. Daniels, is bureaucrats.
That's one way to say it.
Bureaucrats, yeah.
And I real quick about the critical race thing. Brother Charles already mentioned it. They're blowing a bunch of smoke about something they don't even understand. That's one. But if you actually really pay attention to all the hell that they're raising, what they're really in fear of is us starting with the youth addressing the truth and reconciliation part of reparations. They're afraid of us addressing that starting with the babies. And that's what they're really talking about. The whole idea of the critical race theory is just a smokescreen. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
You know how true you are. When they raided the Black Panther Party headquarters, they weren't looking for the guns. They destroyed the food from the breakfast programs first, because J. Edgar Hoover said they are polluting the minds of these young people while they feed them breakfast. So get rid of the food so that they won't have a free breakfast program to pollute the minds of their children to think about revolution. Good point, my sister.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to all of our amazing panelists who joined us tonight for this really important discussion on reparations in the context of the state budget, but also in the context of us understanding the various different perspectives of how reparations should look, how it should be implemented, and the best ways for our communities to truly feel repair. I want to thank our audiences who stayed on the call and on the video chat all throughout tonight, thanking our Facebook audience, thanking our YouTube audience, thanking all of our folks who participated in this very critical discussion. It's Black Liberation Month here. And it's important that we actually look towards solutions to help liberate our people. We're not free at this moment. We might have some freedoms, but we're not totally free. When we still have issues around being able to get loans and access to capital, when we're fighting to make sure that our schools are fully funded, when we are seeing police brutality being ever so prevalent, when we're seeing the minds of our young people being polluted through systems of racism and that perpetuating, when we're seeing the division of our Black family, that's not freedom. That's not freedom. And that's not true liberation. And so we have a lot of work to do in this movement, in this space, to help liberate and empower our people and get them to understand what that true mental, physical, social, and emotional and economic freedom looks like. And so we had a moving discussion tonight, and this discussion will turn into action over the years that we continue to be active in our various spaces. I, myself, being a state legislator, Dr. Bailey being an author and a teacher, Sister Tia Struther, who's actively engaging Black communities, not just here in the 5 boroughs, but all across the state of New York, and getting their opinions and perspectives on what liberation looks like. Thank you so much, Sister Tia. We're rooting for you when you go into them rural areas of the state that are not kind and friendly to people that look like us.
We've had some rough times. We've had some get beat up in a couple of places, but yeah.
That's what racism looks like. You know, when you go in some of them areas, white folks don't have to worry about that. You go in certain places, you can be thinking twice. You know what I mean? White folks don't have to worry about that.
It's a thing. And we're sending our love and our prayers and support to you, Sister Tia, as you push our message for the liberation all across the 62 counties of the state of New York. Brother Daniels, thank you so much, Dr. Daniels, for the work that you do in the spaces you're doing, not just on a New York State level, but a nationwide level, to make sure that reparation are truly realized for our people on a national level. I want to thank my Deputy Chief of Staff and Legislative Director, Ms. Monet Schultz, for organizing this panel discussion tonight. It's always amazing to have a great staff, a great team that are true believers, that understand that this doesn't end at 5 p.m., but liberation is a 24-hour struggle for our freedom. So much love and appreciation to you. Thank you to our viewers, our chief of staff, and all the rest of my staff who's backstage and helping put all the tech stuff together. We know we had some technical issues tonight, but I'm thankful for a successful program. This will be the first of many discussions. And of course, to our friend, colleague, and leader, Brother Barron, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For being a voice and a true champion for Black liberation and carrying the Black Panther Party struggle with you everywhere you go. Whether you're sitting here in the New York State Assembly, we miss you, or you're sitting in the New York City Council, you bring that struggle with you. You bring your people, you bring East New York with you everywhere you go. And we appreciate that fight and that struggle. So I encourage our audiences to tune in next month as we speak about Black women, and as it's Women's History Month. Every last Thursday of the month, we have our community conference series. It will be March 31st, 7 p.m. We'll be back live here on Zoom, on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter. Hopefully you all tune in and hear the very important discussions, hear the conversations, but also be a part of a community that's interested in being educated and empowered. My office is committed to making sure that we promote civic and political empowerment for our communities. And I'm proud to lead a team to that effort, to that end. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Thank you so much to all of our team and to all of our viewers who took it all in. Let's put our words and our vision to action. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Pleasure and an honor.